High-intensity work sites operate at the edge of physical tolerances. Massive kinetic energy, heavy machinery, and dense personnel movement make risk a mathematically guaranteed factor. The 2021 Workplace Safety and Health Code of Practice redesigns how these risks are managed. It moves site safety away from static compliance checklists, turning it into an active, multidisciplinary defense architecture. Mechanical strikes and electrical faults are no longer the only variables to solve for. Today's safety protocols must integrate invisible, systemic threats directly into the hazard matrix. This includes defensive site engineering to mitigate hostile actions. Under the SG Secure framework, protecting perimeters and controlling site access are mandated risk management components. The same rigorous logic applies to biological vulnerabilities. Epidemic response protocols like split team deployments and modified HVAC ventilation are standard variables in the risk assessment. The most complex variable introduced is the human factor. Cognitive fatigue, prolonged operational hours, and declining mental well-being directly increase the likelihood of critical errors. Securing a site today requires a unified system of legal accountability, empirical hazard calculation, and rigid control hierarchies applied to every conceivable threat vector. Even the most advanced safety engineering fails if the chain of command is ambiguous. The WSH Act establishes strict legal boundaries for who is responsible for specific risks. At the apex is the employer. Their legal mandate is absolute. Identify and eliminate all foreseeable hazards, including threats to mental well-being. The employer delegates operational oversight to area managers. These managers approve local risk assessments and hold authority to block high-risk activities. Human resource managers ensure the personnel match the protocols. They filter recruitment, maintain precise training records, and monitor organizational factors like work stress to prevent cognitive fatigue from compromising site safety. To execute the actual assessments, the code mandates multidisciplinary risk management teams. A localized assessment cannot be isolated. It requires input from process engineers, production operators, and maintenance staff. Defining these specific duties guarantees that when a hazard is identified, there is a clear, legally bound individual required to calculate its impact and engineer a solution. The assessment process begins with scoping. A massive worksite is subdivided into self-contained operational areas or specific tasks to ensure no localized hazard is overlooked. Within each scoped area, teams catalog every variable. They map kinetic mechanical hazards, toxic chemical exposures, and biological agents, and psychosocial stressors. The 5x5 risk matrix quantifies these variables to generate a risk prioritization number. The vertical axis maps severity of harm, from minor injuries to fatal casualties. The horizontal axis tracks likelihood, from rare occurrences to almost certain events, heavily influenced by organizational factors. Both metrics must be scored under the existing controls rule. Assessors evaluate severity and likelihood, assuming the current mandated safety measures are already active and functioning. Multiplying the severity and likelihood scores produces the risk prioritization number. If that number falls into the red, it triggers an immediate high-risk classification. Low risks require ongoing monitoring. Medium risks require mitigation over a defined period. A high-risk designation mandates that work stops immediately until the hazard is engineered down to an acceptable level. The matrix translates environmental noise into clear, actionable math, forcing teams to deploy systematic defenses to lower the numbers. The primary objective of any defense deployment is to reduce the risk prioritization number to a state defined as low as reasonably practicable. The hierarchy of control provides a top-down priority framework. The apex requires hazard elimination or substitution. Below that, engineering controls physically isolate workers from threats. Next, administrative controls establish rigid safe work procedures. Personal protective equipment is the final, least effective layer. A single control is rarely sufficient. A resilient system combines layers, backing up a physical engineering control with specialized administrative training to ensure it operates correctly. For hazards scored in the high-risk category, safety cannot rely exclusively on a hard hat or a respirator. Heavy reliance on PPE as an interim measure is strictly prohibited. By enforcing this hierarchy, site security relies on permanent physical and procedural architecture rather than trusting the individual reflexes of a worker. The 2021 code requires this exact hierarchy to be applied to highly complex, asymmetric threats, starting with counterterrorism protocols. To neutralize the threat of a vehicle ramming attack, organizations deploy active engineering controls, using steel bollards or concrete walls as a kinetic barrier. Biological transmission is mitigated through a combination of administrative split-team rotations and structural upgrades to HVAC filtration, actively engineering viral loads out of the indoor environment. The code addresses systemic internal failures as well. Excessive workloads and rigid, prolonged shifts directly multiply the likelihood score for severe mechanical accidents. Unmanaged chronic conditions and severe cognitive stress are calculated operational variables that must be mapped before safety-critical tasks begin. A modern risk assessment is legally compliant only when it analyzes the cognitive state of the workforce and the physical security of the perimeter with the exact same rigor applied to heavy machinery. Designing a secure site is an active, ongoing operational loop. The environment changes daily, and the hazard matrix must adapt in real time. This flowchart illustrates the final, mandatory review phase. It guarantees that implemented control measures do not degrade and remain highly effective as site conditions evolve. An assessment must be completely recalibrated at least once every 3 years. However, any bodily injury, procedural shift, or new intelligence regarding a biothreat immediately triggers a mandatory review. Every assessment matrix, mitigation strategy, and training record must be archived and available for regulatory inspection for a minimum of 3 years. Information must flow down. Every individual stepping onto a site must be fully briefed on the precise risks they will face and the exact protocols built to protect them. Workplace safety and health professionals translate complex legal mandates into the physical boundaries that keep a workforce alive. Examine your site's hierarchy of controls. Run your current matrix against the latest psychosocial and security threat vectors, and engineer out the hazards before the shift begins.